This is the chapter 25A or part 1 video for the animal chapter, vertebrate animals. And while I'm pulling this up, I'm going to mention to you guys that I am having some issues with my cell phone, and I'm not able to sometimes connect with people that call my office phone. So you've probably already seen the note on our Due to a homepage, but I just wanted to let you know if you've been trying to call me, my phone is being really crazy, and I'm sure maybe some of yours are too because of all the people working from home and things like that. But if you need to get a hold of me and you can't reach me by phone, send an email. I am checking that several times throughout the day. Okay. So chapter 25, the vertebrate animals. Okay, just to start out with this chapter, looking at the phylogeny, kind of how we typically classify animals now in a new, more modern sense. These names here in parentheses are examples of animals, but the names above here, like these, each of those larger, or not larger, names that are not in parentheses, those are the classes. Okay, so we're going to be in kingdom, Animalia, or sometimes called kingdom Metazoa. And then we're going to be in phylum, Chordata, or the chordates. Okay, so these are some of the different classes. We're not going to go through all of those, but some representative classes of animals or organisms in phylum Chordata, kingdom Animalia. And we talked at the end of the last chapter about the tunicates and the lancets and how they have some characteristics that the rest of the chordates have, but they don't necessarily have a vertebrae. Okay, we can look over here at some of these differential characteristics over here, like the presence of a skull. Okay, so these animals that have a skull would be called the craniates. Okay, and that's just one way that the systematicists classify organisms. And then these here are the ones that have the vertebrae or the vertebrates. And then these three groups here are what we call the tetrapods, or those that have four, you get it, tetra, pods, that means 4 legs or 4 feet. And so these are just some of the ways that these organisms are kind of broken up based on their characteristics. Okay, so we see the evolution of jaws, lungs in some of these organisms, fins, lobed fins versus ray fins, limbs, and then different characteristics that we see in mammals. Okay, so this is on page 413 of your book if you want to check that out and just see how the different vertebrate animals are classified based on their characteristics, and also some genetic features as well. Okay, so things that all chordates have in common, that'll be something that you'll want to remember for the test. All chordates have deuterostome, development, Deuterostome, which remember that there's deuterostome and protostome development. Deuterostome is basically, if you remember that means the second opening in embryological development is the mouth. In the protostome development, the mouth is the first opening that develops during embryological development. Some other characteristics that chordates have, at least during some point in their life, is going to be, or at some stage in their life, is going to be a dorsal nerve cord, a notochord, that's an N, N-O-T-O-C-H-O-R-D, pharyngeal slits, we'll talk about those, and then a post-anal tail. Okay, so these are all characteristics that chordates have. Okay, so a nerve cord, if we remember the grasshopper dissection that we saw, the video, remember he was talking about having a ventral nerve cord that would go along the underside, basically like along the stomach area in the grasshopper and some of the arthropods, okay? In the chordates, the nerve cord is going to be a dorsal nerve cord, okay? And that's going to be on the back side or the upper portions of the body. It's a hollow cord that is filled with fluid, and it's going to basically extend into the brain. Okay, so your spinal cord, that's the nerve cord. Okay, the notochord is a rod that extends along the length of the body between the digestive tract and the nerve cord, and it provides support for the body and attachment sites for muscles. Okay, in chordates like humans, this notochord is only present in early stages of embryological development and disappears as the skeleton develops. So basically the notochord is replaced by the skeleton. Okay, so it's something that we see during embryological development. The fourth or third characteristic is the pharyngeal slits, and those are sometimes called gill slits. And these are located in the pharynx, or AKA the throat, which is just behind the mouth. And in some chordates, the slits develop into functional gills, like in fish, and others, they disappear and form other structures. So in humans, our pharyngeal slits help produce the inner ear. And I believe also have some functions with jaw development as well. Okay, so these again are things that are seen in all chordates at some stage in development. So with humans, it would be during embryological development. And then a post-anal tail. Okay, so no person that you know of has a tail. But during our embryological development, we do have a tail, and which is lost during development. But a post-anal tail is basically a muscle tissue, if you think of a dog or cat tail, that continues on the bottom part of the bottom part of the nerve cord. But more other animals will lack that type of a tail after development. Okay, so humans are chordates, and it seems like it kind of alluded to that we lack all of these features except for the spinal cord or the nerve cord, but it is during embryonic development that we have some of these structures and then lose them through development. Okay, and so this is looking at a human embryo. Okay, and you can see the tail structure that's there, the gill slits that go in and help build the ear, and in other the other structures as well. Okay, so I mentioned the craniates. earlier, those that have a skull or basically a skull, that is a clade. So that is one group of organisms that systematicists place into a clade based on whether or not they have a cranium, a skull. Okay, and then we have the tunicates and the lancets that we alluded to a little while ago in the last video. So the tunicates, which is the first clade, are small. They're an example would be a sea squirt. I'm not going to say a lot about those, but they're in this phylum because they do have that postanal tail, the pharyngeal slits, and notochord and other things. And here's an example of a sea squirt. And then the lancets are also aquatic organisms. They're the second clade. And the lancets are very small and fish-like. And here is an example of them. And again, they have like the gill slits, the nerve cord, notochord, tail, and so forth. The craniates, the third clade, like we said, they have skulls. Okay, and that skull can either be bone like ours or cartilage like with a shark. Cartilage, as you may already know, is kind of like bone. It's a tissue, but it is less brittle and more flexible. Like your nose, you have cartilage here, you have cartilage in your ears and so forth. And it's not as brittle and it's more flexible. One other thing about cartilage is that cartilage has a lot less blood capillaries in it. It has a less blood supply. So if you've ever had an injury to cartilage, you might remember that that takes a lot longer to heal up than an injury to a muscle or a bone. And that's just because it's not getting as much oxygen and nutrients to help with the healing process because there's less blood flow to that cartilage. But cartilage is very important and helps structures be flexible. Okay, so we have craniates in two different categories or subgroups if we split them out into the vertebrates, which we're all familiar with, and also the hagfishes. Okay, so vertebrates are animals where the notochord in embryological development is replaced by a vertebral. Whoops, I spelled that wrong. Column. And again, it could be bone or cartilage or mixture of both, depending on the type of organism. Okay, so that craniates are divided into the hagfish and the vertebrates. And the vertebrates are the ones that have the vertebral column. Okay, now this particular slide here, again, just like the one we saw with the invertebrate chapter, just some examples of different groups, different classes of organisms, whether they fertilize the eggs internally or externally, how they breathe, their hearts, what that looks like, and then how they regulate their body temperature. This one is ectothermic, and animals that are mammals are endothermic, plus birds are endothermic as well. Okay, so ectothermic, ecto means outer or outside of, so they get their body temperature regulated from the environment. So if they get, for example, a snake, if a snake is really cold, they will go underground, or they will go find a warm spot in their environment to try to warm up. If they're hot, they'll try to find some shade or a cool spot. Whereas humans, we have mechanisms within our body systems that maintain our temperature, and so we don't have to move with the sunlight or things like that to keep our body temperature where it should be. Okay, so there's some pictures of hagfish. This is hagfish slime. You can see a few of them there. They get they secrete a lot of slime. Okay. So most of what we're going to spend in the rest of this chapter is going to be with the vertebrates, okay? Vertebrates, we know, have a backbone, and that backbone, as you probably also already know, is going to have several functions, like supports the body. Okay, it's a support system. It provides an attachment site for muscles, so those muscles can move. It protects the nerve cord, okay, which is in the brain, which is very very delicate. If you sever your spinal cord, that leads to paralysis. So the spine, the backbone, the vertebrae help protect that delicate tissue, and it is part of a living internal skeleton that can grow and repair itself. Okay, so if you break a bone and you get it set, and it will basically repair and grow back together. And so the bone is a living tissue, just like a muscle or anything else in the body. Okay, so vertebrates, we're not going to talk about every one of these, but we're going to hit on most of these groups. Include organisms like lampreys, Lampreys, cartilaginous fishes, ray-finned fishes, lungfish, amphibians, reptiles, and of course mammals. Okay, I'm not going to spend much time on lampreys and lungfish, but here's what they would look like. And then we get into the cartilaginous fishes. Okay, this would be class Chondrichthyes, and I think these are really fun names to say, so maybe you should practice it. Class Chondrichthyes are fish, and these cartilaginous fish are like the sharks, skates, and rays, like stingrays. They have a jaw and a cartilaginous skeleton. So their skeleton, their skull, backbone, all of those things are made of cartilage rather than bone. And they have little tiny scales that cover over their body. And they also practice internal fertilization. So the male gametes would fertilize the egg inside of the body. Okay, so here is a stingray and a shark as examples of those cartilaginous fish. And so here in just a second, I want you to stop the video, and you have an assignment to do. So you'll go into D2L content and watch the Shark 101 video. There is a vertebrate animal lecture assignment in there, vertebrate animal videos. I'll show you where that's at the end. Actually, let's just stop. Let's show you right now where that is. Okay, Bio 112, content, videos, chapter 25. Okay, you're right here. You'll click on that, pull up a PDF, and there's 3 different videos that you guys are going to watch as part of your lecture assignment. Okay, and you need to do this by today at midnight. Okay, so you're going to watch the Shark 101 video, answer these questions, and there's 4 videos. So, and then you'll put those into Dropbox. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. So take a second and stop the video and watch the other video and answer those questions about sharks. Let me get back to where I was. Okay. So watch the Shark 101 video. All right, so skates and rays, part of the class Chondrichthyes, are mostly bottom dwellers, bottom of the ocean, and they have wing shaped fins and long thin tails. Rays give birth to live young, and skates lay eggs, which is a little bit different. Some rays have spines on their tails, or near their tails, that can be used as a weapon, and others can basically kind of give you a little electrical shock if you get up next to them, or so they can sting and stun their prey. Okay. The next class, and this one's really fun to watch or to say as well, is class Actinopterygii. Say that one 10 times fast. Those are the ray-finned fish, and they live in both fresh and seawater. They have fins that are formed by webs of skin and supported by bony spines. So let me see. So we have a ray-finned fish. Let's see, here's our fish. Okay, there's his eye, there's his tail. Okay, its fin is going to have little pieces of cartilage and little rays that stick out, little cartilaginous rays. The muscles that control this fin are in the body. Okay, now there's also what we call lobed finned fish. Okay, here's a little fish, and they're going to have like an arm, and that's going to be made of bone, and then they have kind of a ray out there from on the outside. Okay, so the muscles on the lobed finned fish, which are a different class, are going to be here, kind of like in the arm. So it's like an arm, it's like a scuba diver with fins on his legs, right? They're going to have like the muscle structure on the appendage, whereas the ray-finned fish, this fin is controlled from the muscles associated in the body. Okay. Ray-finned fish have scales, as you probably know, and they also have a swim bladder. And that is basically a sac inside of the fish that they can fill and empty with air, with gas, that helps them maintain buoyancy. If they need to dive deeper, they can let some of those gases out and go down deeper, or if they need to just kind of float, they can fill that swim bladder with a little bit of gas and help them swim. We have a perch dissection coming up in a few class periods, and you'll get to see what that actually looks like on a perch. Also, before you move on, I'm going to have you stop and watch the second video of that assignment, and that is the gill function video assignment. So go back to D2L there, click on the gill function link, and answer those questions. Okay, so you can learn how gills extract oxygen from the water and power that fish's metabolism and basically all of its cellular processes. Okay, so stop the video, watch the gill function video, and come back. So here are a few examples of fish, ray-finned fish, okay? Eel, seahorse, anglerfish, and some of the normal fish species that you probably heard of before, like catfish and carp and trout and things like that. Okay, next class is class Amphibia, and you know what those are, right? Those are the amphibians, are frogs. Amphibians were the first four-legged animals, so they're tetrapods, okay, to invade land. Okay, but they are still tied to water, and we'll see why that is here in just a little bit. Amphibians have varying the limbs of the amphibians have varying degrees of adaptedness to land. Okay, salamanders crawl. If, you know, they go really slow. They're not real agile. They haven't adapted real well to land. Is if you compare them to frogs that can leap and jump and move rather quickly. Okay, so here's some examples of amphibians. Okay, here is a tadpole, a frog tadpole, so a young frog, an adult frog, a salamander, and then this is a coelian. It's not a worm or a snake, it is an amphibian in this particular class. Okay, amphibians have a 3-chambered heart, which helps it move blood more efficiently. If you remember back to the earthworm and some of the other more primitive invertebrates, they had little pumps. So it was just one chamber that was pumping, okay? And some organisms have a 2-chamber heart. And if I remember, I will write myself a note. In the next video, I'll come back and talk about the difference between 2- and 3-chamber hearts, because I don't believe we are covering the circulatory system. Let me double check that. Yeah, we're not covering the circulatory system this semester, so I'll speak briefly about hearts next time. But they have 3 chambers. A human has 4 chambers to their heart. I'll talk some more about that next time when I have some visuals for you. Amphibians do have lungs. However, they're not really inefficient like a lung in a human or other mammal. As you may know, amphibians like frogs have to breathe through their skin. They can diffuse oxygen through their skin to help get enough oxygen, enough gas exchange. And so for this reason, their skin must remain moist to conduct this respiratory function. Another reason why amphibians are tied to aquatic or water type habitats is because of their breeding behavior, their reproductive behavior. Fertilization in frogs and toads is done externally versus internally like the cartilaginous fishes. And it needs to take place in water so the sperm can swim to the eggs and fertilize them. And the eggs then must remain wet or moist because they are protected by a jelly coating that really can cause some problems if water is evaporated, and those eggs will dry out and they will no longer be viable. Different species of amphibians keep their eggs moist in different ways. Some simply lay their eggs in water. Other amphibian species have fertilized eggs that develop into aquatic larvae, like tadpoles in frogs and toads, and others undergo a transformation called metamorphosis. Okay, metamorphosis means double life. They do some changing. You've probably studied the life cycle of frogs before. Some differences between frogs and toads. Around here, unless you're along the river or creek or pond or whatever, you probably won't see very many toads. I'm sorry, won't see very many frogs, but we do have toads here, which they need moisture as well, but not as much as frogs. So here's some ways you can tell the differences. Frogs are going to have smooth skin, where toads are very bumpy, and they have moist skin. They live in or very, very near water, and they have long hind legs for leaping. Okay, smooth skin, long legs. Toads have a tougher, bumpy, dry skin. They live on land. They do need to have some moisture as well, but they have shorter legs than frogs, and they do more hopping rather than jumping. Okay. They both vocalize during the mating call. Okay, so here's another place where I'm going to have you stop and go back to the assignment and watch another video on the frog life cycle. Whoa, come back. Okay, so take a minute, watch that video, answer the questions, learn a little bit more about frogs, and come back. Okay, so frogs and toads sometimes contain toxic substances. Okay, that can be distasteful or even poisonous to predators. I'll tell you a funny story. My mom and my dad had this dog after, I'd moved out or whatever, and this dog was really kind of dumb. And there was a toad jumping around the shop one day, and the dog went up to the toad and started licking it and kind of playing with it and stuff. And I don't know what kind of toxic substance that toad had, but that toad made my mom's dog so sick. It foamed at the mouth and it vomited, and it was very sick. So don't ever lick toads. You never know, they might be kind of toxic. But there are also frogs that are very, very toxic, like the poison dart frog. One of those frogs could kill several adults with their toxins. Okay, so you have to be careful around those, but those are in South America, in the jungle type habitats. Another group of amphibians are the salamanders, and salamanders have tails. Okay, so tadpoles have tails, but adult frogs do not, and toads do not. And they kind of almost look like lizards, but they are different. They have different types of skin, different life cycles, and so forth. Most salamanders live on land. Oops. And salamanders can also regenerate any lost limbs. So if a predator grabs its tail, it can regenerate and grow its tail back. Okay, so I am going to stop